And we remain committed to supporting the increasing government, industry, investor and community-led demand for independent assurance of sustainable outcomes for communities. To achieve targets agreed under the COP21 Paris Climate Agreement and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, this is absolutely necessary. Release 3 of the Building Queensland Business Case Development Framework was an ambitious task and sets a new standard, one that government, industry and others will all need to contribute to. It lays the path for more consistent delivery of wider economic benefits through public infrastructure investment. So to get an idea of who we have joining us today, please indicate on the screen poll that a description of which best aligns with your role. I believe we have a poll on our screen. Great. We have a very diverse spread of professionals joining us, so it's certainly going to make for a very interesting discussion when we open up for questions. So that we maximise participation, we do have one short presentation, 5 short, sharp 2-minute synopses, and then a good allocation of time for engagement. So feel free to start submitting your questions immediately, and we can get the discussion started at pace. To submit questions, please only use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. You're welcome to make comments and complimentary statements using the chat function. So next up, to share more details about the updates to the business case framework, the 3 guides and supplementary guidance is Irene Sitton, Principal Advisor, Strategy and Advisory from Building Queensland. Thank you, Irene.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you, Ainsley, for the invitation to speak today. Today's webinar is a great opportunity for me to outline some of the important work that we are undertaking focused on sustainability, and I thank ISCA and the GBCA for the positive collaboration we have enjoyed to date. Given the Australia-wide audience, I'm going to first introduce you to Building Queensland and tell you a little about who we are and what we do. Next, I will provide an overview of our business case development framework, our rule book or guidance for developing business cases. Specifically, we'll have a look at our recent Release 3 or 2020 update. I'll provide some background on the legislation by which we were established. I probably should say, first slide, thanks. And how sustainability fits across the 3 stages of our proposal development. And finally, I'll drill down on sustainability, the Queensland policy context for sustainability assessments, and walk through some of the sustainability considerations that are incorporated in business cases. I plan to talk for no longer than 10 minutes. I've got my clock on, and hoping that this will set the scene for our panel discussion and audience Q&A. We're also happy to share the slides to attendees post the event. Next slide, please. So, oh, sorry, one back. Who are we? One back. Oh, yeah. Many of you will be familiar with our state infrastructure bodies. So Infrastructure New South Wales, Infrastructure Victoria, or even Infrastructure Australia. Unlike the rest of Australia, the I-body for Queensland is called Building Queensland. In an organisational form, we're a statutory body established under Queensland legislation, the Building Queensland Act. Next slide. Oh, sorry, what do we do? Our purpose is to provide independent expert advice to support Queensland Government in making infrastructure decisions. We publish a framework for assessing the costs and benefits of infrastructure projects, the Building Queensland Business Case Development Framework, and we develop business cases for major infrastructure proposals with partner agencies such as health, transport, and even government-owned corporations. We have thresholds in our legislation, but as a rule of thumb, we lead the development of detailed business cases with an estimated capital cost of greater than 100 million. The Business Case Development Framework, and the link is there on screen, it's applicable for all business cases led by Building Queensland, and this helps ensure that we have a consistent and rigorous approach to business case analysis. While the fundamentals of business case analysis haven't changed in the last update, a significant focus for us in Release 3 has been to ensure our framework remains contemporary and reflects best practice approaches. For those of you familiar with our original guidance, you'll note that there's been an update in our style and format, and these updates make the guidance more user-friendly, scalable, and include downloadable Word templates to assist practitioners. Release 3, importantly for sustainability practitioners, incorporates updated sustainability guidance, requirements for dealing with future uncertainty encompassing climate change and resilience, and have a real focus on whole of life and whole of system analysis. Next slide, please. Our standard approach and our business case documentation covers 3 stages. The sustainability focus, however, is primarily in stage 2 and 3. We complete detailed cost benefit analysis for preferred option in the detailed business case phase across the quadruple bottom line: financial, economic, environmental, and social. And we also present a sustainability assessment. Next slide, please. Our starting point is our legislation. So when we provide advice on business cases, it needs to be based on rigorous analysis, taking into account economic, social, and environmental sustainability. The other major policy statement in Queensland was introduced as part of the 2016 State Infrastructure Plan. Next slide, please. In the lead up to release 3, we've done over 30 business cases, detailed business cases since our establishment, and we've received a lot of feedback and we've learned a lot. So we've tried through this most recent update to respond to these learnings, but recognise that there are still challenges. So I'm just going to walk through in the next slide some of the key changes in this release. So to keep pace with contemporary practice, our technical guidance, rather than mandating specific requirements for sustainability assessment, continues to leverage and point to good practice guidance delivered by our peak bodies, such as the Infrastructure Sustainability Council of Australia and the Green Building Council of Australia. We also promote the benefits of using sustainability practitioners and leveraging the expertise and existing guidance and techniques that are available to achieve good sustainability outcomes. A new addition in this round has been the building assessment tool, which Sandra and the GBCA helped us with. Next slide, please. In release 3, we have better integrated sustainability throughout general considerations for proposal development, including a sustainability assessment requirement in stage 2, options assessment. So it's no longer just a qualitative options filter consideration, we require some consideration. We've also highlighted opportunities to use available resources such as the ISCA planning tool in early stage development. Next slide, please. A focus for us has also been the whole of life and whole of system. We are investing for the long term, and therefore we need to integrate system-wide evidence-based planning to support proposal development. We should not underestimate the value that comes from whole of life, cost and benefit approaches to asset and service delivery, and that includes benefits management. Building for the long term also incorporates resilience and dealing with uncertainty, but this is just a big topic, and I'll just say that a lot of organisations are doing a lot of work in this space, including the I bodies. Next slide. So what for business cases? So quadruple bottom line analysis is at the core of our proposal assessment. We consider strategic context, the public interest. We undertake social impact evaluation, environmental assessment, economic assessment, financial assessment. So where additionally does sustainability fit in? In the absence of a BAU approach by our partner agencies, we have worked with the GBCA and ISCA to develop a Building Queensland approach to sustainability, which incorporates assessment templates and recommends a series of steps and multidisciplinary workshops to complete. Sorry. The templates, we're still back on the other slide. I've just put the slide up, just back. This is an extract from our detailed business case guide, Appendix 1, and there's a lot of information about, you know, questions and answers that you can incorporate into your analysis. So when we think about sustainability, it's how do we use this information? How do we incorporate it? And from us, it's about, you can frame your analysis at the initial stage of your business case development to say, what do I need to think about? Or you can use these templates and tools during the business case development as, you know, a control point checklist or part of an innovation challenge. Or potentially at the end of the analysis, you can say, you know, what is the so what? Have I covered everything? Have we thought about sustainability in a holistic way? How do we plan for the next stage of our proposal development? Next slide, please. So I've talked briefly about the so what, and I've talked about the need for integrated analysis across technical streams and the need to have that long-term sustainability lens. But what does that mean in practice for sustainability practitioners? How can we embed sustainability as BAU? And how does a sustainability practitioner deliver value through business cases, given client context, available tools, and within budget constraints? So I put down in the next 2 slides some considerations for all of us. You know, how does Building Queensland, our partner agencies, and our practitioners actually work together to achieve good sustainability outcomes in business cases? So I've just put the ideas down there and I'll leave it at that. Sorry, oh, you should flick to the next slide as well. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Irene. That is a really well-considered body of work for best practice, and knowing all the hard work that BQ invested to bring it to fruition, as well as all the stakeholders you collaborated with, just want to say a big congratulations. So before we move on to our panel discussion, I just want to quickly check in to see what the results of our poll were. Are we able to bring those up onto the screen? Wonderful. There seems to be a lot of representatives from the design and construction sectors. Yep, and then project initiation, development, and business case, and strategic planning. Terrific. That's going to give us some great ideas for our discussion later. Now I just want to introduce all of the panelists who are involved in today's conversation. So to explore the implications of BQ's work, we have joining us today a panel of technical experts from Queensland Government. They include Andrew Perthwaite, Director, Innovation and Engagement at Queensland Treasury, Ramsey Zetek, Director, Environment and Cultural Heritage at the Department of Transport and Main Roads. Also, we have joining us from the Green Building Council of Australia and ISCA, Davina Rooney and Ainsley Simpson, the respective CEOs who we all know. Also, joining us for some industry insight, we also have Ben Mason, an economist from Frontier Economics. So the challenge today that we've given to our experts is to share a punchy 2-minute synopsis of the opportunities and the value of all this work that we just heard about. So Andrew, let's start with you.
Thanks, Sandra. And it's great to be here today. Look, this is the big challenge, not only in Queensland, but across Australia, how we deliver certainty, consistency, and provide opportunities to engage with the private sector, as well as getting good outcomes for the public. One of the things that we've been driving in Queensland is looking at how we can build consistency in the approaches we take, particularly around sustainability, but also around understanding the assets through the life cycle of the asset. How do we make sure that we get good outcomes across the entire life cycle, and how does that start? In Queensland, we've developed a strategic asset management planning framework to lift the value of the assets to the very top of the organisation so that people understand the value that the assets provide, the key decision makers understand that, and they can ensure that they get really good outcomes. Of course, what we've also done is built in things like sustainability. So how can we make our assets much more efficient? How can we make our assets deliver better outcomes? How can we look at the full life cycle of the assets in the work we're doing? As well, we've delivered a lot of work and good policy around building information modelling, digital engineering, to look at how we can better understand how our assets are performing, how we can use that rich information into the future, and how we can derive better outcomes, again, over the life cycle of the asset, how we can repurpose those assets through their entire life cycle. Sandra, it's clear and important that we also need to get uniformity and state level consistency, because the Australian market really is a pretty small market when you look at the world level. So we are working with our state counterparts to get really important outcomes to ensure that we can get good evidence-based outcomes, to also ensure that we can improve the operation of the assets over the life cycle. And it's been really great to work with Irene and her team at BQ and the other members across the state government to get good outcomes for the new assets that are coming through, but also to lift the way that we deliver outcomes and deliver assets and improve their operation. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andrew. Now going on to Ramses.
Thanks, Sandra. Thanks for inviting me to speak about sustainability in business cases and ensuring whole of life sustainability. And just going on from what Andrew has sort of already touched on, and also Irene, this is important for us. For the business case, are aligned with the ISCA framework in our ultimate goal of delivering value for money infrastructure for the state. In driving sustainable transport projects to ensure whole TMR has been applying sustainability assessments through the ISCA rating to all our major projects over 100 million in size, and that also conforms with our state infrastructure plan requirements. TMR also has a number of other sustainability initiatives that are going on in the background, such as waste recycling, use of recycled materials in infrastructure, and also pavement R&D initiatives that have a lower greenhouse gas footprint. However, one of the areas I'd like to focus on today is climate change risk assessments and their role in sustainability assessments and supporting whole of life asset management. TMR has recently published engineering policy to support our sustainability assessment process, and it can also be rolled down to projects below that current threshold for those sustainability ratings as well. With transport infrastructure being a significant investment with often a long life cycle, it's important that these considerations are assessed against future climate to ensure the investments around a piece of infrastructure are sound and that it's designed with the appropriate risks and considerations to ensure network resilience. The earlier that climate change hazards and opportunities are assessed in a project life cycle, the better the project can avoid and mitigate risks. And for example, for transport projects, some aspects of future scenarios have a greater influence in that strategic assessment, prelim evaluation, and option analysis phase consideration, where other scenario effects impact business case and design considerations and consequently adaptation planning. So just to give the audience a bit of information around what TMR has in that space. So TMR has utilised a few sources for some future scenarios that can get used for this process, including a Data 61 report that our policy area has released, and that's published on our website. And that has some useful information around the future mega trending and foresighting of the transport system going forward into the future. And in terms of business case development for infrastructure, TMR's recently published the Engineering Policy 170 plus some supporting framework and documentation that are all public facing on our website. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more to this process in the Q&A following.
Fantastic.
And sort of in summary, all of this is channeled together through our ISCA sustainability ratings on our 100 million plus projects. And we work across boundaries with other road agencies to ensure that sort of industry has a similar interface with government across the different states.
Thank you so much, Ramses.
Thanks,
and
Sandra.
then, no problems. And then Davina.
Sorry, having a brief moment unmuting oneself. You'd think I would have learned multiple months into this. Look, it's an absolute pleasure to be here today. I really have to congratulate, you know, all the partners within Queensland Government, Building Queensland. Such an exciting time to actually see leaning into more analytics around sustainability frameworks used critically in the business case, which really leads to early consideration. And when we see that value hasn't been created, it's when sustainability is considered as a light touch, it's not genuinely considered, it's not validated through these early stages, and actually having a rigorous review through these processes. And so we see phenomenal value as the opportunity to be created, exactly as Irene stated. I think we have to be absolutely looking at framework across, you know, the life cycle of these projects and able to step up and answer those questions. So when we actually look at, you know, from the Green Star example, we take very seriously our responsibility to rigorously analyse financial considerations where possible. And we partner with MSCI on the Green Property Index and have been able to show for office, where we have our longest asset classes, the most recent figures show that those assets have an 8% higher value. So they cost 1 to 3% more to build, but an 8% higher value. What we're finding is that they're having over 20% higher income. The tenants are staying longer. They have 50% less vacancy than comparable buildings in the CBD. And so when we actually look at financial considerations, there's the cost savings are there for government. There's a large number of green bond opportunities. I had the privilege back at my time at Stockland to be involved in Australia's first corporate green bond, which was in 2014. I think we all need to get really innovative as we lead into different ways to actually demonstrate the cases. I'm really looking forward to unpacking the questions today about how we bring rigor into those frameworks. And this is something that Ainsley and myself are really passionate about. A framework, you know, can't be all things to all people. So when you want to dive deep into climate resilience or dive deep into net zero, that's why for our new 6-star buildings, all new 6-star buildings after our future focus release will need to be net zero in operation. That's why resilience requirements will be mandated. And one of the things that partnerships like this really give governments an opportunity is that actual alignment of principles, and to know, whilst covering those principles at an appropriate level in a business case, that there's actually going to be long-term consideration and validation through all the different building stages and indeed into the performance stages. And we know that our partners that are able to complete that actually absolutely do that and receive value through the whole life cycle. But we equivalently know that those who give sustainability a quick consideration and sort of need to pull back or change direction, that is not the way that best value has created. You know, so thrilled to see these guidelines sort of giving project teams a clear parameter and process and actually aligning and then seeking to score the projects from being advanced to non-compliant as a real pathway, that the aim being that the highest and best value projects rise to the top, as they should in a business case project. And I would actually note that both myself and Ainsley are very happy to continue to partner with projects. This is a change of process. So the other thing that I'd like to acknowledge is we're very happy to lean in and work across industry, noting that this may make a change for the process of some of the participants on the line. And we're very happy to lean in and learn as we go through these processes, because if we're going to hit the Paris Agreement, if we're going to hit Queensland net zero targets, we're all going to have to work together, and we're going to have to change these processes across the transition. And we're very excited to see this step up process. So looking forward to Q&A.
Thank you. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention another representative from the Queensland Government. I should have introduced Katie Dunbar from DES earlier. My apologies, Katie. Katie, would you like to go next with your synopsis?
Yes, thank you so much. No, I get that. I'll do things like that as well. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really glad that even though we're, all isolated and we're visiting with each other virtually, we still get to do these fantastic collaborations. So I guess I wanted to highlight today how the work that we do at the Department of Environment and Science helps drive those sustainable outcomes related to our policy objectives. So for us and our branch, our climate change branch, the vision that we have for both of our strategies, the Queensland Climate Change Response, it's underpinned by, wanting Queensland to be an innovative and resilient place. So I think that sort of, underpins everything that we do. Then, of course, we've had a few people mention, the zero net emission targets by 2050 and the interim by 2030. That also drives the work we do. And also I was thinking about this before I came on this morning, and really the sustainable outcomes that we achieve, it's not possible without the collaboration and the partnership that we've developed with a range of different stakeholders across the years. And that includes, ISCA and Ainsley, who I've worked closely with, also Andrew, Ramses, Irene. So we actually work together quite well and have done so for a number of years. And I think these relationships are actually essential if we intend to continue to deliver these kinds of outcomes. And particularly now that you're looking at reduced budgets, you're looking at focus on economic recovery, responding to COVID. I think we've got to be innovative and smart about the way we do work. So I thought I would just mention today a few of the pieces of work that we are doing that I think Queensland Government deliver on its commitments under the Queensland Climate Change Response. And, it's around managing our risks to property, assets, infrastructure and services. And incorporating sustainability objectives into infrastructure projects. And also we try to lead by example. So some of you may be aware of this, but we did a piece of work with ISCA a number of years ago where we mapped all of the different credits that ISCA has in its tool against all of the actions in the transition strategy and adaptation strategy. And what we're able to see is that there was over half, I suppose, of the action credits really closely aligned. So there's a really strong connection with what we are trying to achieve in terms of sustainability under our response, and also the ISCA rating tool. So that information has been really useful. We've been able to share that with our stakeholders, and that's also helped influence creation of other pieces of work. We're also working on understanding our climate risk for critical pieces of infrastructure, working across government. That's an ongoing piece of work, and that's with a company called XTI. And also most of the agencies on the line today are actually involved in that piece of work. So the aim is to basically understand what our risks are and then work together to develop pathways to respond to that. And I guess the key function that drew us to the tool was that it has a cross-dependency function. And that's what we wanted to try and really draw into. The other report I wanted to mention, it's not released yet, but I understand it's going through sort of approval processes at the moment, is Queensland Building Sector. It's emissions and abatement pathway report and implications for Queensland building sector. Now, I know we're working with HBW to implement the findings in this report, but I just thought this is something that's very topical for what we're talking about today. And that will actually help contribute to our emission reduction targets. Now, how am I going for time? Am I over, Sandra?
No, we're fine.
Sorry, I'm a bit of a time. I'm like, oh, I don't want to go over. And then also the work we collaborated with ISCA on the reshaping infrastructure for a zero net emissions future issues paper, which is a fantastic piece of work. And I know our collaboration is ongoing. So I thought that was just fantastic. And also on the circular economy side of things, I just wanted to draw out some of the work we're doing around material flow analysis. So that report won't be ready till the second half of the year. It's sort of focusing on identifying hidden resources and how they move around the economy and sharing that information to unlock economic potential. So I'm pretty excited to read that, and that's sort of something within the branch that I would like to sort of learn more about. So I've been very excited to sort of be working in my acting director role to get across a lot more of our business. That's all I really wanted to say at the moment. We have got such a dearth of information in terms of reports we've developed, modelling, data and tools. I'm happy to share. I've sort of got a bit of a table that we've done up that we're actually going to share. Building Queensland is going to share that with Infrastructure Australia for a workshop next week, just to sort of give a really high level overview of what is actually available now publicly that people can actually dig into and have a look at. So I'm happy to share that as well.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Katie. Thank you for sharing that plethora of projects that you have currently working on and progressing. That sounds really promising, and I'd love to tease out some of those projects with you a bit later. And now moving also on to Ainsley.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sandra. Well, first I want to echo most of what Davina said in terms of our partnership and this being a shared journey that we're on. We do want to lean in, we do want to learn with you. So Davina, thank you for setting the scene. In terms of my synopsis of the opportunities that present, I think the overarching opportunity which is unlocked by considering sustainability at the outset is the focus on whole of life benefits. While our bodies do look to ensure strategic fit, deliverability, and social and environmental value, without clear guidance and a framework, in practice, the intent is not necessarily matched with impact. So congratulations to Building Queensland, because your new assessment framework does address the need for infrastructure decision making to support wider social outcomes and social license, and importantly economic value as well. And that's as a result of using best practice. So two of the opportunities that I think will be unlocked is first the inclusion of sustainability at the early stages of the of the business case, is that it sets the foundations for an evidence base of data to be collected and assured and then transparently communicated. This will demonstrate the outcomes that are being delivered for business, for the community, for the environment, and for the workforce. And importantly, it will also give state government the confidence to move forward, knowing that for every dollar of cost invested in a project delivering an IS rating, they will deliver $1.60 in return. The second opportunity is that projects following the assessment framework will now more clearly connect strategic fit of the business case to state level objectives. Now, Katie's discussed some of the work that we did together, mapping the climate risk strategies against the rating scheme. The evidence base already exists, and we know that certified projects in Queensland have delivered climate change outcomes, which have included things like assessing climate change risk, adaptation and mitigation action. There's been reduction in energy and greenhouse gas emissions, transition to renewable energy, and then other co-benefits like knowledge sharing and stakeholder engagement. All of those things are called out in the two strategies Katie mentioned, as well as the Queensland strategy for disaster resilience. Now, these findings demonstrate that using a performance framework will assist in strategy implementation, sustainable outcomes, and consistent assured data. Now, through the partnership that we had with Queensland Government, amongst others, our net zero emissions paper jointly released with ClimateWorks and the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, we now know that 70% of Australian emissions are enabled by infrastructure. Queensland, like all of the other Australian states and territories, have set targets or aspirations which infrastructure is going to contribute to and will need to respond to. So with record levels of investment now underway in assets that will be operating beyond 2050, now it's more important than ever for us to build better business cases that deliver long-term outcomes. And that is our shared responsibility. Thanks, Sandra.
You're welcome. Thanks. And last but absolutely not least, we have Ben Mason from Frontier Economics sharing an industry insight.
Great. Thanks very much, Sandra. So, yeah, I just want to talk in more practical terms to perhaps crystallize what could happen here. So, I mean, the key point to me is that by incorporating sustainability early into infrastructure planning, that it provides the maximum scope to impact on sustainable outcomes. And so in the business case process, you should really be considering sustainability as a potential problem that you're seeking to resolve before you've even defined what your project options are. So to me, a really good, albeit somewhat extreme example is the congestion zone in cities such as Singapore, London, Stockholm. So I mean, if you think about it, it's a response to the road network being at capacity. And so a typical solution to that would be to widen your roads or perhaps to build a mass transit system. However, by taking a step back and thinking about the root cause of the problem, which is congestion, these cities have reached a non-build solution and created value through making more efficient use of their existing assets. Congestion zones are also a really good example of how to play to externalities. So an externality is where there's an impact that's not included in the price paid by a consumer. So in this case, drivers on public roads do not pay for the congestion that they contribute to on the network or other impacts such as emissions and noise. So through the congestion charge, that means that drivers now pay for these externalities, they incur the full cost of their trip, and so they should actually use the network more efficiently. And so to me, I think in the broadest sense of sustainability, that's a really good example, and it illustrates the power of framing the problem in such a way that you can get to a completely different solution to that which you may have initially thought of. And so just to put a few quick numbers around that, in London, where they introduced a congestion zone in 2003, they found that in 2006, the level of congestion in central London was 26% lower than 2002 levels. They found that in the first year of the congestion zone, there were 37% more people using buses to enter the congestion charging zone. And whilst the numbers vary a bit depending on which greenhouse gas emission or other factor you're looking at, somewhere in the range of 15 to 20% reduction in pollution between 2002 and 2004. So to summarize, really, I'm interested in embedding sustainability so early into infrastructure planning that it can shape completely different sustainable projects rather than superimposing sustainability onto a solution which is already locked in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ben. So we have already many questions coming in from our audience. I'll quickly just recap on the topics that we covered within that 10-minute summary. We have a spectrum of views. So very quickly, we talked about building capacity, driving sustainability outcomes, achieving policy objectives, transparency and assurance, social license, global best practice, and valuing externalities. To start with the questions, I might first go to Irene and Ramses in relation to the work that you're both progressing that you've told us about. How do you see this work driving government capability and capacity to address sustainability? Irene, perhaps you'd like to start first? Irene, maybe you're on mute.
Sorry, I was going to nominate Ramses because of all the good work they've done in implementing the ISCA framework and the accreditation process, and that's feeding now into some of their procurement processes. So I'll hand over to Ramses first because that's probably good practice in Queensland government.
Sure.
So can you just repeat that question? It broke up a little bit for me.
Yeah, absolutely. The question was, how do you see the work that you're taking forward driving government internal capability in supporting some of these sustainability considerations?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. So one of the reasons that we, and I'll tell you the climate change risk assessment that in the earlier introduction section that I was given the opportunity to speak to, that's one of the areas that sort of there wasn't a lot of documentation, I guess, around in terms of process, and we were getting a little bit of different ways of approaching it, I guess, across different projects. So in terms of capability development, one of the reasons that we went down the path of publishing these engineering policies to get some consistency across projects, and that way we can sort of build off that going forward. And we don't see it as being a a totally static document going forward. If there's additional new ideas and innovations that come up from processes along the way, we'll learn from that, and we'll include that in our processes. But we thought it'd be useful to have a standardized starting point to benchmark most of our projects from, so that we can have a look at how that process works in terms of managing the risk, and then actually getting those treatments in place to manage those hazards under the risk assessment process, and then obviously continually improving that as we go forward.
Fantastic.
I'll just add, Sandra, that working with sustainability practitioners is also a way of building capability. So partnering with our agencies, many of them have resilience or sustainability internal capability, and then it's working with external advisors to build that capability, and also working with organisations like ISCA in induction processes for our project teams.
Perfect.
And just to add to what Irene has said, we hold a number of internal and with external stakeholder workshops around some of our project learnings. So in terms of building capability, we invite industry along to present some of their learnings, and that can be the things that work and the things that don't work within our processes. We have that on a routine basis. I think it's quarterly currently, it could be 6 monthly, but somewhere around that sort of rotation. And at the last industry and knowledge sharing event, I think had 4 of our industry partners presenting on some of their project experiences, which has given us some additional things to look at with our own internal process as well.
Great. Thank you for that. The next question I'd like to throw to Katie, and it's about achieving policy objectives. You mentioned the linkage between the Queensland State Government's ambition of driving down emissions and some of the projects that you're taking forward. I was just wondering, could you elaborate on some of that?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the work that we are doing to drive down emission, it's across Queensland Government and across sectors. So we've got particular work where we're looking at how across Queensland Government we can actually drive down emissions, and we facilitate work with lots of other different agencies to do that. So for example, the report that I mentioned, Queensland Building Sector Emission and Abatement Pathway Report. So basically this is around progressing emissions reduction in the building sector. So DES is working in collaboration with Department of Housing and Public Works to develop this report, and then the idea is that the findings from this report can then be used to influence policy. So a lot of the ideas behind the work that we do, when we get these reports and this modelling, is then how does that actually hook into the existing policy hooks that we have across Queensland Government. So the work that we do, we definitely can't do it all within our branch, and we have to partner with all those other agencies out there who would have particular mandates to implement this work. So HBW deals with a lot of assets and stock that government owns. So they're one of our key stakeholders. We also work with the planning department to actually look at how we can influence policy to look at reducing emissions. So we did a piece of work, would be a couple of years ago, where we worked with the planning department to actually influence the state planning policy. And that is a local government instrument predominantly, and it looks at how state interests are actually reflected in those policies, and so how that relates to on-ground outcomes. Looking at the end of the day, I think we weren't able to get a lot of sort of hard policy change, because it is quite a challenging space, and we don't have a Climate Change Act. So when you're working in sort of planning and development, you're looking at what can you actually do based on a head of power, based on a particular parcel of land, you know, a no-go area. But what we actually did get was we got some policy around supporting renewable energy projects. We also have a lot of great information in the SPP guidelines that support those policies, and that's all available on the website. So that's, I mean, there is, to be honest with you, Sandra, so many different pieces of work that we are doing. We could like run a series of workshops about all of those reports, because there is just so much work. So something that we're really looking to focus on, I guess the latter part of this year, is actually looking at, you know, how we can promote some of that work, communicate that work with stakeholders, and actually get the work that we've done implemented across government. So it's a challenging task, but it's exciting, and I think, you know, we're in a good position to do that now.
Great, thanks, Katie. And speaking from an industry point of view, I'm sure we'd be delighted to collaborate with you on those pieces of work, and to help you to socialise all of that work with industry as well. Okay,
thank you. Yep.
Great. So next question I'd like to throw to Davina, and Ainsley, please feel free to jump in. I have a question here which asks to GBCA and ISCA whether combining the tools that each agency has developed was considered as part of the BQ process.
One of the things that we had as a discussion is it's really important that GBCA and ISCA are totally aligned, and that we seek to partner together. The first thing I'd like to acknowledge is how you measure sustainability in building a tunnel or a road is fundamentally different to setting up of a building, and then how you operationalise the energy tracking over that asset's life cycle. And so there's a difference which we think is appropriate. The thing that we think is really important is that we have alignment. And that was why last year we launched a guideline of showing where the alignment between the tools are, which credits, you know, actually have a cross recognition. And we're spending more and more work leaning in, you know, for example, the net zero work that infrastructure has listed uses a similar process where buildings also partnered with Climateworks and ASBEC to deliver this in the building space. So we think that strategic work should be aligned. We think that framework should be aligned, and we actually think that it's our role to get on the front foot to try and work through with projects to actually simplify these things as much as possible. So we think that fundamentally the way pieces of infrastructure are done and buildings, there'll always be nuance and difference, but it's kind of our role through collaboration to work together to make that journey as seamless as it can be. And we're very happy to work with participants offline. If that hasn't been your experience, we'd like to work with you to ease that, and we'll definitely do that together. So Ainsley, your thoughts?
No, I think, Davina, you've captured it perfectly. Thank you.
Great. The next question I'd like to address to Andrew, and that is, has there been any traction within state treasury departments to reflect sustainability opportunity and risk in the economic analysis of business cases over the forecast life of assets?
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. Look, there's some of that work has started. As far as I'm aware, we are only a recent addition to Queensland Treasury following the machinery of government changes in early May. But my understanding is that a number of treasuries prior to COVID-19 were starting to actively look at this, and a number had said that 2020 was that period to look at these opportunities. Of course, COVID-19, as everybody is experiencing, has changed the priorities and the focus. But now is a good opportunity to actually, as projects come forward, to be really clear about what we're looking for and to embed some of these changes in place, particularly in the policy conversation, particularly in the assessment, because we know that international capital is looking for more green, clean outcomes. We know that the community is also looking for better outcomes which reduce the carbon impact. We know that the work of the Green Building Council and ISCA is getting traction across communities, and that will ultimately get reflected in the decisions that treasuries across the nation make, because the Treasury officials will report up, and also the treasurers through the Board of Treasurers is also looking at this longer term approach, tempered, I guess, by the impact of COVID-19 right now.
Right. This question I'd like to address to anyone from the Queensland Government, and it touches on the theme of consistency and alignment. I just wondered the extent to which you worked with other state jurisdictions in developing the latest business case framework, or approaches to address emissions reduction. Is there a view from either Katie or Irene or Andrew or Ramses perhaps on that?
We might let Irene lead that one.
Oh, Irene, you're on mute.
Irene, you're mute. Oh.
Sorry, guys. I have a tree lopper outside, and I'm just conscious that it's about to start. And I was distracted by looking at the extent of the Q&As. So, Sandra, the question was on alignment of frameworks.
Yeah, that's right. One of the questions from our audience was, has there been a consideration of developing a standard business case framework across each of the state infrastructure agencies so they're nationally aligned? And I was wondering the extent to which you collaborated with other state infrastructure bodies or government agencies.
Yes, so we definitely collaborate. You'll find that our guidance is very much leverages the Victorian framework, the Infrastructure Australia framework, the New South Wales framework. There's some great guidance out there. Personally, I would love alignment. I just think one framework would be great. But we have legislation that says we build a framework, and one of the things we do in our in our framework is actually hands-on. We actually deliver business cases, so we need practical templates, guides, tools, so that our project business case developers actually have enough to do the job. Infrastructure Australia, their framework's great, but they don't actually deliver. So part of what their framework talks about is a prioritisation process and assessment process. And, we're not going to repeat great stuff from Victoria. So there's some great guidance on investment logic mapping. There's great guidance on dealing with uncertainty, real options analysis. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. So we just do what we do to actually get our job done. And we welcome great guidance from everywhere.
Fantastic. Anyone else from Queensland Government?
The only thing I was going to say, Sandra, was that so my normal job when I'm managing my adaptation team, the way we collaborate across all jurisdictions is we have an adaptation working group. And we work quite closely with them around trying to align our feedback on a range of different topics, particularly, things like the CSIRO report that's going to National Cabinet really soon, things about our approaches to feedback on the Royal Commission, also sharing things about what are our approaches across transition and adaptation policy regarding monitoring and evaluation. We do quite a bit of collaboration through that group. There isn't sort of an equivalent for the transition side, but I know that Rebecca Duffy, in the work that she did, developing a range of different, policy options, would have been talking to her counterparts across Queensland Government and across all the other jurisdictions. Yeah.
Fantastic. We only have time for one more question, and I'm going to throw this one to Ramses. Through your work, Ramses, I was wondering if you can provide us with an example of a project that was assessed for economic, social, environmental sustainability and how that affected the decision to progress or not progress with the project.
Okay, that's a good question. And with our major projects, we apply the ISCA process on pretty much all of the 100 million plus projects. So they're being assessed for, or they're being actually measured in terms of their performance against all of those particular criterias. And we've got, I think it's close to 40 something projects that are either registered or in line to be registered for the ISCA process. So we think that's a very important mechanism to use to actually demonstrate anything that comes through the business case and is actually being delivered, how it's all being carried through and assessed, and how our sustainability performance as an agency is actually being reported. And having the ISCA tool available to utilize for that also allows us to compare our project performance, I guess, with interstate projects as well. In terms of your comment around the upstream, I primarily work within our infrastructure management area, so I'm sort of more in the space of once a project is past business case, we set up information to assist before business case, but my involvement's predominantly pre-construction onwards, essentially. So I might need to take that bit on notice and get back to whoever asked the question in terms of any of the upstream decision making. But in terms of, definitely in terms of once the project has commenced, we have a stringent use of the ISCA framework, and we do compare across and benchmark across government to have a look at how we're performing versus some of the projects in the southern states, for example.
Thank you, Ramses. I just noticed that we're cutting it very close in terms of time. So I just like to thank all of our panelists for joining us in this discussion today. It was absolutely stimulating from my perspective to hear all of your experiences and insights. And I hope with more events like these, we can grow the potential for industry to support government's ambition in these areas and learn more about the work that you're doing, all of this good work. So in closing, I'd like to thank Building Queensland for sharing the detail of the Business Case Development Framework update. And again, congratulate the Queensland Government in providing a solid structure to realise these ambitions. Also, again, thanks to all of our wonderful panellists for generously contributing their perspectives. It's been truly a meeting of minds, and I feel like we only scratched the surface of all the questions that our audience has had. And importantly, expressing our appreciation to all of you for your time and your inquiring contributions. On that note, thank you for joining me, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job, Sandra.
Oh, no worries.
That was, I'm sure that there were, yeah, many things going on in the background, but you did a fantastic job. Thank you so much.
It was, I wish I had a better handle on the technical side of things, because I was trying to learn Zoom as I was using Zoom. So that was quite interesting. But no, all good. I think people were pretty happy.
Yeah, you're a quick study.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, that was fantastic. I really enjoyed it, personally speaking. Thanks for joining us. Is there anything that I need to do, Carlos or Ainsley, following this session?
No, we're all okay. We're all good. Everyone's just signed